Hello YouTube. It's been a while since I last posted video. I've been thinking about some revisions that I would consider making to the tournament rules that I have talked about before. These are kind of just ideas that I'm tossing around to address some of the more serious imbalance or historically inaccurate issues with the game, even after the tournament rules. So you could call these my revised tournament rules or maybe my house rules. I'm still working out a few items. There's one thing that I'm not entirely sure is balanced, but this is kind of where I'm at so far. So the idea of these revisions are, like I said, to improve game balance and to re- uh, kind of encourage things to move on a more historically accurate route, while also keeping the revisions as simple as possible, not making them overly complex, making them fairly easy. No splitting of territories, nothing that would require a reworking of the map, splitting one territory into two, one sea zone into multiple, adding naval bases or anything like that. So that's kind of what we're looking to try and do. So one of the biggest issues is that the victory conditions for the Central Powers require that they take Paris. Well, require that they take two Allied capitals. One has to be Paris. The problem is that you've got Paris over here, of course. France is putting its units there. England is right next door. It can shovel guys over. And a few turns in, the U.S. is over here. And the only real direction, unless it wants to go off on some other adventure down in Africa, the main direction it's going to be going is funneling guys right into France, which means if the Central Powers don't take Paris in the first couple turns, you might as well forget. If you're playing a game with a time limit, you might run out the clock. Maybe you can take out Russia, maybe you can take out Italy, but according to the official rules, even with the tournament setting, you have to take Paris. So I would revise that, and I would say that the Central Powers have to take any two Allied capitals. However, if one of those capitals is not Paris, then they must hold those capitals for an entire round. Basically, so let's say Germany's taken Rome, and then it takes Paris. It must continue to control Paris until Germany's next turn. No, I'm sorry, I had that backwards. If it controls any two Allied capitals, one of which is Paris, the Central Powers just automatically win. So on the turn that Paris is taken, assuming they control another Allied capital, the game just ends. I misspoke before. The alternate rule would be, yes, they could take two other Allied capitals, neither of which are Paris, but in that case, they must control them. If Germany takes Moscow and Rome on one turn, it must continue to control them until its next turn. So there is still the the mechanic still encourages an attack against Paris because the Central Powers can win faster that way. However, it does not require it. There are other options. I also want to strengthen unrestricted submarine warfare. So I would, instead of the rules in the book, I would say that it applies to any German sub unless it's located in Sea Zone 11 or 12, too far back from the front. If it's anywhere else on the board, and it hits on a roll 1 through 3, which is a little bit better. So the geographic restrictions are almost entirely lifted, and you have a slightly better chance of actually hitting and doing damage. The U.S. would still automatically come in the war if unrestricted submarine warfare is initiated by Germany. Now, there are a few other more neutral adjustments I would also make. I would use my version of the double move rule that says you can move two spaces from friendly territory to friendly territory, or to a territory that you contest, but not to a territory an ally of yours contests. That will require a little bit more foresight on your part, and unless you have troops, let's say Germany, Austria against Russia, if they're coordinating well, they're rewarded for it by having each other's units in each other's territories. And if they do not manage it well, then they're hindered because they aren't going to be able to move as fast. The same thing would take place with England trying to move units maybe from India into Russia. It's going to slow it down a little bit, require it to think a little bit more rather than just zipping guys around all over the place. In addition, I would adjust Switzerland here. It's going to continue to be a neutral, but rather than a relatively weak neutral that's only worth 1 production, it's actually going to become 3. So it's going to become amongst the more powerful of the neutrals with 3 production. So either side can still attack and move in there, but it's going to be much more costly in terms of casualties than the regular game setup. Another adjustment that I would make has to do with the seaports. And I have found that the Allied advantage in Navy is massive in this game, especially when seaports allow them to move very quickly. 3 spaces for a non-cruiser, an entire 4 spaces with the cruisers. You could go from Italy, 1, 2, 3, 4. You could be all the way up to England. Or you could be, ships that were put down up by England could be all the way down here the following turn. That seems a little bit excessive. So I would basically take that bonus movement away from those sea zones. They will still be used for defensive purposes. They will still put sea mines in those areas, but they will not allow for the bonus movement. In addition, I would increase the hits for sea mines from where it is now, where you have to roll a 1 or less, or well, I guess just a 1 in order to hit, to a 2. So that's going to make seaports actually a lot more powerful on the defensive, and it's going to make them more strategic as well, attacking a territory maybe just to capture an enemy seaport. So I would go ahead and make that change. And that will do it for those updates. Now, I have several other updates to go, and one of them does have to do with Navy. It seems very strange from a historical perspective that for some reason France has a larger battleship fleet than Germany. That simply is historically inaccurate. England of course, had the largest navy, but they would have been spread out to a degree, and Germany definitively had the second largest navy, yet Germany only starts with 1 battleship, and for some reason France has 2. So I would weaken the French Navy. In the lead up to the war, England and France had an agreement where in the event of war, England would defend the north up here, and France moved its navy down here. So we're going to even out the battleship fleets. We're going to replace this battleship with a cruiser. We're also going to remove one of these French transports to weaken their navy and make things a little bit more balanced. Now, I just put up the French Navy for this video just because I've got 2 changes in 2 different territories. I would also remove the Austrian transport in Sea Zone 18. That way they can't, from the outset, invade Tuscany. Now, if they decide, the Austrian player, they decide to build a transport, they could go ahead and do that, but just to lead out with that that's not really a capability that they ever even plausibly considered. So I'd go ahead and remove that transport as well. Now, another issue that you have with this game, with tournament rules especially, is that England will just dump everything it has in India. It'll completely leave France to fend for itself, build nothing or very little navy up by the UK, and we'll just dump everything in India. And that needs to be adjusted, I think. So I would make the adjustment and say that a maximum of 4 units. India is worth 4 production. That's where I get the 4 units from. And that's harkens back to some older versions of Axis and Allies. Territories, when they had a factory, could only build the number of units, or a number of units equal to their production. So I would make that 4 for India at most, and that's going to make England produce more up off of its island, which really it really should be doing. The current game mechanics incentivize it to not do that, but since we're making adjustments, I'd go ahead and do that to encourage it to, spread itself out, which really, that's what it should be doing. Further, I would consider, and so an issue is that the Ottoman Empire often just gets knocked out by turn 2 or 3, economic collapse, and there's really not a whole lot you can do as the Ottomans. So restricting British placement in India is going to help. I'm also going to make Constantinople up here. I'm going to make this a strait, and so in order to pass through, the Allies actually have to control Constantinople. In the actual war, the Black Sea was bottled up, and so we're going to replicate that, and that's going to help the Ottomans. The Ottomans are still going to be quite weak. It's just going to make it a little bit harder for the Allies to knock them into economic collapse within the first couple of turns. Now, several of these updates, certainly when we strengthen the Ottomans by making that a strait, and we've taken one of the French transports away, and we've limited what England can place over in India, that's going to mean that the Ottomans have more that they can throw against Russia. And this is the part that I'm not entirely confident that I have completely balanced. But I want to add some new units up in Russia, some additional infantry. And right now, the number I've kind of been playing around with is 5 infantry just from the get-go. We're going to place 2 of those infantry up in the north in Karelia, up there. We're going to place 2 more infantry in Moscow over there, and we're going to place 1 additional infantry over here in Kazakhstan. So the Ottomans are expected to be stronger. The Germans and the Austrians, if they decide that they want to pour into Russia and they do a good job of coordinating their units, they're going to put on a lot of pressure, as they tend to do. But the Central Powers have a slightly better opportunity to go against France if they want to do that, I think. The U.S. is still going to come in on turn 3, but because its seaport does not give it that bonus movement, it's actually going to be turn 3. This is as far as it can get, unless it comes down here. But as far as the European mainland, this is as far as it can get. It's actually going to be turn 4 before they're able to land anything. So that effectively slows the U.S. down a turn by making that naval base adjustment. It still wouldn't be easy, because England's likely to have more stuff up there. And Germany is likely then, even if they are trying to go after France, they're going to have to divert at least some of their forces over here, because France and England are going to build up a lot faster than a lot of the time they do. So the question is, then, how many extra infantry does Russia need in this scenario? Let's say that Germany and Austria decide that they do want to go after Russia. Germany has to divert a little bit more over to its western front to deal with that situation, but it has a lot of troops coming this way. The Ottomans are able to send at least a little bit up that way, though they are going to have at least some pressure from India. And don't forget that the UK has several ships, including transports down here, they can pick up and drop off. They just can't come in here. So the Ottomans are still going to have some pressure, just not quite as much as they otherwise would. So again, the question is, how many infantry allows Russia a fighting chance without making it overpowered? Because it still needs to be a viable strategy for the Central Powers to head this way, but it cannot be an unstoppable steamroller either. So those are the things that I am thinking about for possible adjustments. Like I said, I don't want to revise anything too much, just a few rule changes and a few unit changes. The only territory that's changing production is Switzerland. Everything else is going to stay the same. You still produce in the same places that you produced units before. Slight change in the victory conditions. So I'd be interested to know what you all think. Do you think that that's totally unbalanced? Do you think that that's close but needs a couple tweaks? Please let me know. And based on all of the other changes, how many infantry would you put in Russia? I look forward to reading the comments.